Hello friends, and welcome to ResinArt 58. Today we're going to be painting one of these little ghosties. The main feature of this tutorial will be the ghost holding the candy corn. But at the end of the tutorial, I'll show you how to paint this pumpkin. I like to use triangular stones with a smaller section being the top for the head. I'm going to start painting with a sponge using multi-surface paint. This multi-surface paint is good for indoors and outdoors. And when you're painting with this and you're using a sponge, it tends to make a very strong texture with the paint because it creates little bubbles. But if you heat it up with a little blow tool, or if you blow on it a little bit strong, those bubbles will dissipate and it'll give you a smoother texture. I paint the back side so you don't see any brown around the edges if you're looking at it from the side, if it's just laying on a table or in a little stand. And get rid of those bubbles. This is very hot, so if you're holding your stone, you keep that little blowgun moving and then it won't burn you, but it's better to put it down on a table that has a protective mat underneath it. There's the finished stone. It's very bright white. I'm using a regular number 2 pencil and very lightly outlining 2 oval eyes, and then I'll kind of curve the bottom and bring them to 2 points, which will give it a little bit more of an expression. It's got a little jelly bean mouth. His hand will have a thumb only and kind of looks like an oven mitt. Now, I didn't know what I was going to have this little ghost holding at the time that I did this, and I should have put them a little bit closer together for the candy corn. And you'll see at the end I actually had to make the hands just a little bit bigger so it didn't make the candy corn look like it was floating in space. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Drizzle Gray and outline the hands. After I outline the hands, I mix a little bit of the gray with the white to make a shadow underneath his arm. And then as that paint is wet, I will add a little bit more white to it to blend it in. There's the blending. You know, in most of my tutorials, I like to blend something. Now, I covered up a little bit of the outline as I did that, so I'm just going to go and put it back in. Go ahead and outline the other hand. If there's any pencil marks that are showing because you changed the way you painted it, you just go back over it with a white paint and it will go just disappear. It'll be fine. I wanted to blend this gray out a little bit more, so I used a little white. I'm going to get the black paint. You can use any black paint for this, and just go inside of my lines and fill it in. If you go out of the line, you can again go over it with white paint and make it the exact size that you want it to be. Now, I turn my rock an awful lot. That's because I like to pull the paint down towards me and keep my painting hand pretty much in the same position. And I do that by turning the stone. He has the cutest little surprised eyebrows. Right here, I'm just going over any pencil marks that I didn't paint over. Now I'm deciding to put a candy corn in here, and I didn't want it to cover his face, so I realized I could only make it so wide. and the hands aren't quite wide enough to hold it, but we'll fix that when we get to the end. So the candy corns are orange and yellow and white. So I'm having to put a little bit of white paint in with this yellow to cover up the gray. And then I'll go back over it with the bright yellow to brighten it back up. I do make a little bit of a curve to it because they're kind of round, and you don't want it to look like it's just a flat piece of paper. So that curve will give it the dimension that it needs. Now the top, I have it white with just a tiny bit of orange to differentiate it between the ghost white. I'm going to go ahead and outline it so that we can see it pop out a little bit better. There, you can really see the little bit of curve that's going on. Now I'm going to touch up some of the areas where I went out of the lines. See how easy that white paint fixes that? The yellow with a little bit of white, and then I'll go back over it with just pure yellow. I'm going to have to go back over those black lines that are in the middle. If you water down your black paint just a little bit so it's kind of like India ink, the kind that you use for those special pens to do calligraphy, it makes these lines a lot easier to handle. It doesn't pull the paint, but it helps it to flow where your paintbrush is going. Now I'm adding some of that drizzle gray mixed with a little bit of white underneath that candy corn and over to one side to make it look like a shadow. Okay, now his hands are going to get a little bit longer right here. It's got to cover that candy corn a little on both sides to make it look like he's holding it. So see, there are no mistakes when you're painting, and you can always go back and fix anything. And I'm going to get the drizzle gray and just re-outline it. I'm using a very small liner brush. This is a 10-0 Princeton liner brush. It's one of my favorites, and they're not expensive at all. I think I get them for about $2.50 over at ResinArt. And there you have. It doesn't take long to paint one of these, and they're just as cute as can be. Now put that finishing touch on. I watered down a little bit of white paint, went over it 3 times, and I gave my candy corn a highlight. There he is in his little stand. Now this one is holding the pumpkin. I was going to make it a jack-o'-lantern pumpkin, but I put so much detail in it, I decided to leave it the way it was. You can see I was doing the outline with a light blue on this one. Both of them look good, the blue or the gray. But I'm using, I think this is jack-o'-lantern orange. I'll have all of the materials that I used in the description below. So it's going to take 2 coats of that orange, but I'm going to do some shading with a little bit of milk chocolate. Here I'm putting in my 2nd coat of orange. I always do my shading with wet paint underneath and then add the wet paint on top, and that way I can do the blending. I can start out with a light coat and then I can make it darker if that's what I see I want. As the paint dries, sometimes it dries a little darker and sometimes it doesn't. Purple almost always dries darker. So I'm keeping that orange paint wet as I'm blending in the brown. Here's the stem. I wanted more contrast, so I'm adding more dark brown. medium brown. It just needs to have shadows around his hands, around the bottom of the pumpkin. I'll put a little bit on the top just to separate it from the ghosty. Cadmium yellow is what I'm going to use to highlight the ridges of this pumpkin. Kind of visualize where I wanted the stripes. I almost always have the stripes a little bit to the left and the right in the center. I'm using the brown to make the little lines to separate it. The one in the center was a little wide, so I'm going to go back in with some orange, kind of thin it out. And as the paint starts to dry a little bit, I add more yellow highlights. And that's it. I'll put in his eyes and his mouth the same way that I did the other one. And we had a pretty good looking little ghost there. Well, there they are together. Isn't that something? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit subscribe and press the like button. See you soon. Be sure to see my next video, which will be a haunted house. Bye now.